So this video will be actually for classes 6 and 7, basically dealing with contract. Contract is the soul of the business law course, and it's important enough, so this video will be one of the longer ones, but it will be used also for next week. So if you're really diligent, you'll watch it twice. I won't speculate on your level of diligence. Anyway, with that, contract basically involves promises that the law will enforce. And the reason that the law enforces them is that they're supported by consideration. That is, someone has given up something or has promised to give up something in return for something. And the reason that the law enforces those is to avoid unjust enrichment. Basically, they're not going to let the bullies run away with your lunch money. That's the essence of contract. The first, I look at contract differently than the authors of the text. I follow, I think, a more straightforward path. I consider the steps to be offer, acceptance, consideration, mutual assent, legalities, and formalities. They break it down a little differently, and you know what? It's all the same hash. So, okay. First of all, offer and acceptance. Basically, the parties come through some type of negotiation, or sometimes just fall into an agreement that in return for X, there will be Y. You've probably done this a million times yourself. Even when you were kids trading baseball cards or something similar to that. But the offer has to be matched term for term by the acceptance. The offer is something that is given to one person or a specific set of people, and the power of acceptance is granted only to the offeree. Okay, so there has to be agreement. That is a meeting of the minds. I call that mutual assent. And basically, the parties need to be in agreement on what they're actually agreeing about. And I know that sounds crazy, but there have been cases where people mistook what was at stake. And it's important to understand that if one party makes a mistake, they have a problem. If there's a mutual mistake, then both parties may be relieved of their obligation. Another thing to watch in terms of assent is capacity. Essentially, you can't be too young, too drunk, too crazy to enter into a contract. Basically, minors, with very few exceptions, have the right to rescind a contract and return whatever they got with and get their consideration back. There are some exceptions for things closely aligned to food, clothing, and shelter, or if the child is in business or what have you. Sanity of a party can make a difference, and that's something that we frequently encounter out in the real world with somebody too crazy to understand the basis of the contract. One of the things that makes that interesting, just from a perspective, is whether they were going through a period where they were actually lucid. One of the things you miss not having the live class is you don't get to hear about my late cousin Phyllis, who between periods of incredible sanity and intelligence was crazier than a hoodoo. And I ended up cleaning up her affairs. She entered into some very positive, very binding contracts. So sometimes capacity can be a fleeting thing. Keep that in mind. Okay, getting into the second part, one of the things that makes contract is this idea of consideration. It's basically what you give for what you get. Consideration is one of the things that differentiates this from gift, and I get a few people every semester who don't get the idea that consideration is different. In gifting is gratuitous. That means that nobody's getting anything out of it other than a warm feeling or what have you. Yeah, there may be social obligations, but don't trouble me with that stuff. Anyway, but consideration, you've given up something, you're entitled to what you bargained for. One of the things to be careful of is that you may be making a bad bargain. And at least as of January 5th, 2020, this was still America, and you were allowed to make a bad bargain. One of the examples I use, baseball cards. Okay, and I admit I've got some crazy hobbies, but these little pasteboard baseball cards we used to get with bubble gum. If you get the right one, it's worth $10,000. Yeah, okay, good for you. But the point is, if you've gotten what you bargained for, if you want that baseball card that badly, that's fine. The court isn't going to consider the value. Your spouse might, but the court isn't. So, consideration, it's what you give for what you get. Okay, the legality of a contract, obviously courts aren't going to enforce contracts for illegal acts, things like drug dealing or gambling and that sort of thing. Government isn't going to enforce. Enforcement mechanisms usually involve, large, hairy young men with knuckles dragging on the ground. Their actions are beyond the scope of this course. And then finally, the form of the contract. Unwritten contracts are enforceable. There may be evidentiary issues, you got to deal with those. It's better if there is a writing, and a writing is in fact required in some things. And again, the text talks about the sweep of those. The one that you and I are most likely to run to is the conveyance of real estate or contracts to purchase real estate. Those need to be in writing, and there are other things as well. The key word to look for there is the statute of frauds. Once something is in writing, the court is going to take that as the whole agreement. So be careful. If if you get into executing a contract, you will need to make sure that all the terms of the contract are in there, because the court isn't going to want to hear anything that isn't within the four corners of the contract. So, with that, if you are watching this for the second time, remember next week is the midterm. Be sure to view video 8 before watching that. We'll see you on the discussion boards, and have a wonderful whatever day it is you're having.